Welcome back to Rolando Estocada. My name is Rolando, and today we're going to be going over the entire Rolando Estocada knife and sword collection. I think it's important for me to share the collection, but also to share with you some of the guiding principles in how I built it and continue to build it. So these are my Casper Crawford CRKT Columbia River knife and tool folding knives. I actually started with folding knives first. I wanted to understand what it was all about, what carry was about, because especially, living in New York, you had to have an understanding of, well, what are the laws? What are the implications? At the time when I purchased these, I would say that I was heavily into jiu-jitsu competition, but I was also studying Jeet Kune Do, and my instructor, Armando Basulto, was saying, hey, you know what? If you're going to be in love with those types of arts, also be mindful that if you get involved into a street altercation, study knives as well, because something might get pulled on you. And they were very affordable at the time, and I loved the design of them. I mean, look at the ergonomics of it. You have this, you can put your index finger over here, had a nice thumb ramp where the LAWKS, LAWKS system was there to help support that liner lock. And my tendency when it comes to my knife collection is that I tend to have a primary and then a backup and then a shorter version of it. Because again, being a Filipino martial artist, I like to have some sort of sinawali practice. So, same length, a sinawali practice, a long and short practice, espada e daga, and then of course some sort of single one. So that, solo baston, solo sword type of setup. Also, one guiding principle, never sell your knives, never. They become a part of you, their energy becomes a part of you, especially when you train with them. Train with them as much as possible. Next series of knives I ended up purchasing, believe it or not, were these Ontario Bagwell Hell's Bells. This is actually something that I had sent to Greg Covington to rehandle because I wanted to understand the Eagle's Head handle. 24 years in with so many knives, but I can't believe just how fast this knife is. I would say this is my fastest Bowie knife. And I remember when I purchased these, you won't believe how much they cost at the time. I think they were like 140, 150 bucks on eBay. Good luck finding them now for anywhere near that price. I had Greg attempt a bluing of this because Bill had done something similar in his book, and it didn't quite turn out because this is 440C stainless, and when he blued his, he was working with carbon. But so what ended up turning out was this kind of brown, which actually gives it a kind of rugged patina on it, which I really like. When I work with these two, they're lightning fast, and I love that they're part of the collection. So not long after that, I ended up getting an Uncle Bill Martino's Himalayan Imports World War II kukri. So take a look at this beautiful World War II kukri horn handle that I have here. It feels really good in the hand. There's really good grip retention. I love horn handles for that. But this feels really substantial, and man, I can imagine why this is favored by the Gurkhas, because this is one heck of a tool. Like once you deploy this and off you go, this is a really formidable weapon. I would say that my understanding of the kukri isn't as fully well-rounded as I would like. I would say that it still requires some exploration on my part. And as you can see, because it requires more exploration, I've really only purchased one. So I'm kind of thinking about restarting my kukri studies, but probably sometime in the near future I will. But this one I really like. I like having this kukri around. You are looking at the AFCK 806 D2 folder, and again, for martial purposes, I believe Bob Casper had a hand in designing it, and one of his design contributions was the way the butt end was shaped, because the way he viewed it was that the tip was one part of the weapon, but he really believed, based off of his researched that the puño end was really there to do some damage also. There were a lot of knockouts, he said, when there was sparring, and a lot of it had to do with puño. So he made sure that this was ergonomic enough so that if you had to get that palm support in there, it could work. But also enough, so the shape was enough so that if it was going to be used in a defensive way, that the puño would do a lot of really good damage. The 806 D2 axis lock, as you can see, it is so pervasive now, the axis lock. But this was like a big deal back then. This was around the 2000s, so having the axis lock was really cool. And as you can see, you have that oval opening here, and I liked it also because it resembled a kind of modern navaja. So that's one of the things that drew me to the AFCK 806 D2. I still like saying that. This is a Mike Snoddy Benchmade Wharncliffe design. I really like this also, but to me, this was what started to introduce me, especially with that Wharncliffe design, ever so slightly, because again, early 2000s, couldn't get my hands on a ginunting, but this started to expose me to what a ginunting could function, how it could function. Nowadays, you could get Filipino swords and knives, and nowadays you can get ginuntings, but back then you couldn't necessarily get any. But I love this also, 154 cm steel, and in those days that was like, wow, that was one heck of a steel. But liner lock mechanism, really super ergonomic. Really enjoy this knife as well. Benchmade Mike Snoddy Wharncliffe design. I think anyone who's in knives would recognize this. This is the Cold Steel Black Bear Classic. At some point, I had to go ahead and start to really investigate Cold Steel. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that their catalog was just really so varied. And the majority of what they had a martial purpose to it. Cold Steel Black Bear Classic, as anyone remembers during those days, really was the epitome of Cold Steel at the time. And really beautiful, really super sharp. And with that Bob Loveless sub-hilt inspired design, really very comfortable. I really like it. I think it's, I think in many ways that it still holds up in terms of just its overall use, in terms of its design, in terms of its learnings. I've learned that from this design that I don't like sub-hilts. I like having a finger notch, but not a sub-hilt. And because I think that I think it can actually be used against you. Like if you're being disarmed, your finger can actually get stuck in there. So I like it a lot, but I've learned from this design that I don't like sub-hilts. But very sharp, as you can see. Look at that beautiful profile. But yeah, this is fantastic. I love this knife. Now these are really super spectacular. These are the Camillus OVB Jerry Fisk buoys. And I remember when I got them in the early 2000s, I would say this is mid 2000s now. And of course, I didn't get them all in one batch. I would say that they were just one at a time. Practically everything was one at a time. But I loved these, and they were considered at the time one of the top, if not the top, production buoy from a QC perspective ever, because it had the collaboration of Jerry Fisk. And this one is the 11-inch buoy version, and just look at that profile. Look at that. And I'll tell you that these Bowie knives handle like a feather. What's interesting about them, especially this one, the 11-inch, is that if I'm holding it in this manner, you can feel the weight of it. You can feel the substance. Right about here, it disappears. Right about here, the weight kind of changes a little bit, and then when I turn it this way, it starts to kind of gain momentum again. It's a hard thing to describe about this buoy, but I'll tell you that it moves differently from a Bagwell. A Bagwell it's like it understands the back cut flow, whereas this one, if I'm not mistaken, when I spoke to Jerry about it, it was very utilitarian, but at the same time, he had competition buoys in mind when he did this. In fact, when I spoke to him, he said that he carries these and he uses these at the Bowie competitions. And again, this is mid 2000s now. So I was very surprised by that. And he said, no, they're designed to work. So please use them. I'm sorry, Jerry, I have not. I just prize them that much. But they are beautiful. So that was the, I believe, the curly maple. And if I'm not mistaken, these, I believe, are walnut. There's just something really spectacular about this one. The curly maple one, really beautiful. There's just something just so compelling about this one with the darker wood. Same profile, beautiful. And the same thing could be said for the 7-inch versions. Very light, very nimble in the hands. I would say that these I bring them out maybe once or twice a year because they're just, I just baby them. You can't find them anymore. I think there's a couple on eBay every now and then, but they're just very hard to find. Look at that. Yeah, these are great. And every now and then I like to take them out. I do like an Espada Idaga flow with them, double Bowie kind of stuff. And I really enjoy them. Also, as I go through my collection, if there's anything that you want me to review, make a video content out of, please let me know, because I'd be happy to do it. Just drop a comment and just say, hey, I kind of want you to review this. I want to see how you move with it, what kind of paradigm that you've built around it, a curriculum, because yeah, that's what I like to do. Oh, there's a little bit of stuff there. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. I'm gonna go ahead and clean that up now. All cleaned up, ready to go. So right afterwards, I went through this phase, and again, this is the mid 2000s where I wanted to explore every variation of Bowie knives. So not long after the Camilluses, I acquired these SOGs, and these SOGs are, this is the, if I'm not mistaken, this is the stainless one, this is the carbon blade one, and this is the legendary Tiger Shark. And I like them a lot, and a lot of it had to do with an article that I read regarding the original SOG knives. Take a look at how aggressive that profile is. And from what I read, and again, they were being used by our servicemen in Vietnam, and there was some conversation about its initial design, about creating a certain type of wound channel with these knives. And I found that really fascinating, in that, well, then what was the training paradigm behind that, right? So I ended up experimenting with it in terms of, experimenting in the sense of, well, how do I move with it? How does that change anything? Does it pair better with an Espada Idaga type of movement? Is it more like a Doce Pares kind of style, knife fighting style? Or is it something that it might have its own paradigm? I wasn't really sure. There's still a lot to be explored with it. And then of course we have the SOG Tiger Shark. The original SOG Tiger Shark. These were the ones that were made in Seki, Japan. One with the convex edge, and I think this is also the one that famously split a bullet when they were doing their marketing materials for it. Rubber craton handle, really comfortable in the hand. But of course, this is rubber and craton. I'm not comfortable with having a rubber guard, but take a look at that really aggressive profile here. And I would say, if I'm not mistaken, this was designed in the 80s, and there's even a slight, ever so slight recurve on that edge. But I would say there was a time when the SOG Tiger Shark was considered the production Bowie knife at the time, very heavily favored, and it was in direct competition with the Trailmaster, the Cold Steel Trailmaster. And I would say that if I was purchasing in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was basically a teenager, I would say that I might have gotten this hands down over the Trailmaster. But this is very rare, one of my rare knives. And again, if you want me to do videos of any of my knives, just leave a comment on the comment section below, and I'll be happy to put together a video. So around the mid 2000s, I got into Sebenzas. This is around 2005, and I wanted to have a better understanding of one, what the basic hype was about, because everybody was talking about Sebenzas, and rightfully so. All you have to do is do a Google search of Sebenza, and all you'll see is Chris Reeve getting award after award after award about basically one of the most perfectly engineered knives ever invented, ever created. But there was another impetus as to why I wanted to look at Sebenzas, and it really had a lot to do with a visit that I made with a Sayoc group in New York City. And when I visited that group, the instructor actually carried two Sebenzas, one in each pocket. And I was kind of surprised by it. And I thought, really? Sebenza? And he said, yeah, he really enjoyed them. He didn't get into why he carried them, considering that the Sayoc Tactical Group really focuses a lot on very purpose-driven tools specific to their system, but also specific to self-defense. And Chris Reeve Knives isn't necessarily known for that. So I got into it also for that reason. And having spent enough time with Sebenzas, I can see why it can actually be used for self-defense. There's certain reasons why it can be. And I can do a video of that at some point, but it's going to be at a later date. What you're looking at here is the classic 2000. I've had this guy for about, oh my God, since about 2005, and we've had several adventures over the years. Really a lot of utility work, and it's my favorite as far as utility is concerned. Really elegant, really beautiful, and very functional. No headaches whatsoever. And to me, in many ways, they can be akin to Rolex in the sense that, aside from their market positioning as in terms of a luxury tool, but also the fact that they are just as reliable. You never hear any QC issues with Rolex. You never hear any sort of QC issues with Chris Reeve. They are extremely reliable. They do what they're supposed to do. And there's just a lot to enjoy about them. The second one that I ended up getting, and was my office knife for a very long time, was actually the M90. I think this is far more... It's really useful for desk diving. That's what I would say. It's very good. It's very beautiful. It does the job that it's supposed to. But I would say that it's really for desk diving. It's very elegant. Look at the design of it. You would think that if they made a bigger version of it, that it would be a great tactical tool. But I don't think that's the market that they're after. I think that what you're looking at is that it's really elegant, good gentleman's folder, especially in today's age. And I think there's something to be said about this kind of design. Although he doesn't necessarily see a lot in my rotation anymore, but I would say that M90 is a very, very good purchase and a good part of my collection. And then I have since ordered more Sebenzas. There's 3 more that are coming up, but I think they're on a 4-year wait list now, but I have 3 more coming in. But this one here, the micarta handle, which was all the rage when it first came out, really, really fantastic. And another one of my wonderful workhorses. She does a lot of work. This Sebenza is the one that you see in the Blade Show 2024 episode, the one with me and my girlfriend on the cover. And that's the episode where I featured Tomas Alas, Tactical Tavern, and also Kuya Doug. He was on that episode. But in that episode, there was footage of Tomas actually sharpening this Sebenza on the Wicked Edge system. And when they say Wicked Edge, they really mean it. I think they have a really good system, but the talents of Tomas really shine with the kind of care and attention that he gave to this Sebenza. It's a really beautiful, and I've run my finger on that edge, and that's the scariest edge I've ever had to put my thumb to. He did a really good job, almost too good, but there's no such thing. But yeah, this is I really enjoyed the Sebenza design. It's very sturdy, very reliable, but also very elegant and comfortable. And in my roster, as far as folding knives are concerned, in the luxury segment, they're pretty hard to replace. They're just, from a kitchen counter standpoint, you know, if you only have so much room, it's going to be hard for someone to say, hey, I think this is a better substitute for the Sebenza, because I think the Sebenzas really are that classic. And I really enjoy having them in the roster. Not long after that, I got my custom Bagwells, and that event and the conversations I was having before, during, and after he had made them and sent them to me really completely changed the way I viewed knives, because he viewed them as educative experiences. You know, his idea was that the more you move with knives, especially the ones he made for me, custom to me, it was going to create a level of familiarity. And as I became more entrenched in that kind of work, especially as a health and fitness coach, relating to motor control and in terms of overall skeletal and muscular morphologies as a trainer and coach, I understood what he was saying, meaning the more you move with it, the more your nervous system really just becomes more familiar with it. And what's happened is that if you take a look closely at these Bagwells, they have some rust spots, some patina, and I kind of like having that, because if you've ever seen, let's say, a Randall that's been around for 40, 50 years, the patina on those, they're just magnificent. They're in the book that I mentioned earlier in this episode. But there's just something about a well-used knife, not only in terms of practice, but also in just use. And these are those knives that changed in accompaniment with the conversations I had with Bill, that really just changed the way I view them. I view them as primarily educative tools. They help me understand myself. They help me understand how I move with knives, and just changed my whole view. So that's pretty much when my exploratory phase with knives ended. And so my understanding of knives was ultimately dictated by a type of strategy where it has to fit a particular pedagogy, whether it's Filipino martial arts, Bowie knife combatives, or Spanish Navaja, and you're going to see some of those in a little bit, but it has to fit a martial system that supports it. Because anything past that, we're just playing with toys. And I think that's cool also. There's nothing wrong with that. But once I arrived at my conclusion, this was really the beginning of the really early beginnings of the Estocada kind of system. I did go through a Busse phase. I wanted to understand what it was about. I wanted to, if anything, just bring to your attention that if you notice that my knife methodology and my mindset was still between really big knives and then really small folders, really nothing in the middle. And a lot of that was influenced with my conversations with Bill Bagwell, but also a lot to do with the articles that he had written, which he had put together in his book, the Battle Blades book, because he really believed that all you really need is a big knife. Well, yes and no. If you live in Texas and it's open carry, sure, but this is, you know, in other parts of the United States, not necessarily so. But there was also something else that I wanted to think about, which is, well, what are those knives that are in the middle? And what are the paradigms that supported those? And why are they being designed the way they're being designed? And I was noticing that there were quite a few knives in the Philippines that were really a little bit more medium-sized, especially the Balisong. So I hadn't quite gotten to Balisong yet, but a lot of the Espada Idaga work, I saw that, okay, medium-sized knives, so I wanted to understand. And so what I found was the Busse knives, and these are the 2008 versions. They have, I forget the type of finish that they have, but they didn't completely finish these so that it's really, really super sharp. Look at that, 2008 special edition of the jackhammer. And so they're prone to rust. I was able to wipe off most of the rust on this one. And once I remember the name of this one, because I think this is a very special model, I'm going to put it in the subtitles here. But I would say, I mean, look at the handle ergonomics. I know that there are some people who don't necessarily like Busse. They're overbuilt, as they say, but they're really tough. I like moving with them. And as somebody who has handled many knives over the years, I actually like the feel of these. So this is my buck knife, fixed knife collection. Well, they're not all bucks. I have 3 bucks over here, and this one is a Furman. And I would say that this was after I received the custom Bagwells from Bill. I was starting to understand, all right, so now that I have the ultimate in fighting Bowie knives, I want to explore some more of the mid-size, and just so that I really had a stronger understanding. And so the Buck Nighthawk, and this is one of the originals with the Paul Bowes heat treatment when he used to do it for Buck. I found out later that the Buck Nighthawk was actually one of the designs that was a runner-up for Navy SEAL teams to be used. And I at first kind of overlooked it, and at the time it was like only $20 at a Walmart. So I thought, "Oh, it can't be that big of a deal," but it's actually a pretty big deal knife because it was created in a certain way, because in fact you could do a little bit of there's enough weight and substance so you can do some long range snap cuts. I don't know about back cuts, but I think snap cuts for sure. It has enough support over here of that spine where it curves, so you can get a palm assist in there, some fine work with the index finger. There's a nice thumb ramp over here, so very versatile and really full in the hands. And this became a long time favorite for me for a while. And I don't know if you can find them in this exact designation anymore. I think they went through some interesting design iterations, but Buck Nighthawk in the original formulation when Paul Bowes was doing the heat treatment, 200%. This is one of those classics, and unfortunately I only have one of them. You know, I wish I had several of them. These are Buck Strider collaborations, and you can see the Strider influence very clearly here. So you can see that Nighthawk kind of profile on it, but you can see the Strider influences with the jimping, like really aggressive jimping over here and on this side. And you see how much sharper that angles off. Once you have this in your hand, it's like the angles of the handle here, it's almost like a cinder block. And I think it works better like if you have them with gloves, but really, really good, solid construction. And this handle is actually thick. It kind of flares out to the bottom, if you can see that. It flares out. So once it presses right in here, it's like really fixed, and my entire arm line fires. So when your arm line fires, that's one kind of methodology that I like to use. It's different. It's very different versus one that if you just hold on to it and the arm line doesn't fire, it means that you're going to move with it in a very different way, because once the arm line fires, that's it. You're going to rush them, almost going to tackle. But if you have the type of grip where it doesn't fire, what that means to me in my practice is that it's going to be a little bit more fluid. This one, not so much. This is like a tackle. You're going to take them down. You're going to do some work with it. But this is the Bowie profile. And of course, I had to get also the same handle configuration, also a Buck Strider. But this is the drop point. And I think this is the quintessential Buck Strider, I would say. Like true, pure functionality of this. Look at that. Really solid and really superb. I enjoy my Buck Striders very much. And last but not least, in this, I would say we have the Furman knives here. One of the reasons why I got it is because it has, I believe, a false edge. Yeah, it does. Look at that aggressive false edge. Really, really nice. And it has a sub hilt. Like I mentioned, I was going through this phase with sub hilts, And I like it still very much, but I think the sub hilt actually gets in the way of back cuts. It doesn't seem to be right now, but I think sub hilts get in the way because it kind of makes you more index finger oriented when a back cut actually comes from the shoulder. There is a tendency when we back cut to allow the finger, the index finger, thumb to kind of take over and do one of these things, when in fact it should be from the bottom of the palm so that the shoulder fires. So that's one of the reasons why, but still a very good knife. This is really solid and very, very sharp. So these are my Spyderco knives, and as you can see, I really like the James Keating Chinook. This is the second one. I think this is the part 2 CPM S30V steel, and I really enjoyed it because James Keating just had this way of just presenting the Bowie methodology where you could practically apply it to anything. But he also applied, and this was really got me thinking, where he started to apply some FMA methodology and started to kind of crossbreed it. And the way it came about was actually through the Chinook. This is my first Chinook, and this one, I put him through the ringer also. I mean, in fact, the even the clip itself has been dinged because this guy, I don't like to abuse my knives, but I went through a phase where I thought, you know what, I'm going to put you through it, and I really did. I had this guy chopping 2x4s. So there is a practice in Silat when it comes to karambits. It's called chopping wood, where you just go to a tree and you just, it's like you use it as a punching bag. You beat the crap out of your knife. It becomes almost unusable, but if it's any good, it's going to stand up to it. So I kind of did that with this knife, and he's actually an old buddy of mine. This Chinook, we've had some pretty cool adventures, but a lot of it had to do with training. But one of the main things I like is that you can do a back cut with it. You actually can, right? But if you decide to hold it in this kind of ice pick grip, notice that you can actually hook and the edge is forward, and that's really cool. But you can also hold it this way. See how ergonomic that is? And now you can do the inward cuts, and if I'm not mistaken, James Keating prefers to hold it this way. I personally like to hold it in the Bowie back cut way, so if I need to back cut, I can. It's really super fast that way, but it's a very, very versatile tool, and I liked it so much that I ended up getting 2 of them. This one is all but pristine. I don't think this one has even cut paper, but this one is absolutely pristine. And I think that the James Keating Chinook, I think that they are completely underappreciated. When I got them, I thought they were the ultimate folding knives, and in many ways, I think they still are. I think they deserve a little bit more love, and I believe this is either a Merlin, Spyderco Merlin, or Harpy. I forget now. This one is in my collection because they're very prevalent and I don't practice with them. I don't think you need to practice with them. I think this one is a very good study of what's out there, and I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of what it can do, but frankly, I think it has very limited use. Very limited. I don't think it's a very educative tool. I like it. I think it is very intimidating looking, but I think it has a lot of limitations. Very dangerous, but as you can see with the blade shape, I think that as dangerous as it is, it has limitations as well. Not only in terms of application, but I think also in terms of just being educative versus the Chinook. The fact that James Keating, I've seen him use it a little bit on some YouTubes. He wrote an article about it as well in terms of its use this way, it's used this way, it's used this way. The fact that he was able to put that together, I think these are 2 of the more educative tools. And in fact, this guy right here was my good buddy for many years. I retired him a few years ago. It's not like I don't take him out for training every now and then, because I still very much like this. Very sentimental for me, but also still very effective. So I can't fit the entire Randall collection into the screen, but I promise I'll get through all of them. But yeah, it was around that time, I'd say, or it was around 2009, 2010, where I started to collect Randall knives because I just think they're the ultimate. You know, they're forged, they are classic, they are very American in many ways. So there's a tradition behind them, and I love knives and swords that have a tradition to it. And yeah, I started my Randall knife. This is one of my favorites. This is the Trailblazer, really beautiful, really gorgeous, and it has those classic Skagel lines on them. Really, really just phenomenal. And I think that the book that I got, where they had, I believe, the 50th anniversary version, where it had the horn handle on it, but it was a much bigger version. For the love of God, I wish I could find that, because that one was amazing. But this is the Trailblazer model, small knife, for fine work. It's a hunting knife, and feels just really good in the hand. I can say that practically of every Randall knife that I have ever owned. This isn't the complete collection. Some are still in storage, but I am, yes, very much a big fan of Randall. This one is the Randall Bowie 12.9. And look at that. Sharpened false edge. This is the big brother to the Trailblazer. Handle is beautiful. Feels really good in the hand. This one is great. Really enjoy this one. And this is one of the Randall Nordic specials. So this is a little more like the Gentleman's Bowie. So this is, if I'm not mistaken, like a 6-inch Bowie knife. This is a special that is made for Nordic knives for Dave Harvey's company. And this one is really super light. And again, I ordered them because this was part of my exploration of knife lengths, knife designs, which are between the 4-inch, 11-inch. So trying to understand, well, what are they for? How do they work? Is it even worth an exploration? But this helped me. I'll tell you, Randall Bowies, they're very educative, because they have shown me why they were so highly valued in World War II. They're very tough, great utilitarian tools, but also great combat tools. And that's why they're still very highly coveted. There's a great tradition behind them. This is another Nordic knife special. Really super quick, really secure in the hand. Let me show you the micarta Randall Bear Bowie. I have two Bear Bowies, at least here. Look at that indexing here. I prefer this to the subhilt. I think that, yeah, because it just fills the hand really well. This doesn't balance the same way as a Bagwell, because it's really the handle, the weight is really more towards the handle, but you can still back cut with it. I actually started to explore this knife because this is one of the knives that James Keating preferred, so I explored it, and I like it a lot. It's very fast, and the really fast combinations of them. So this is the Bear micarta handle, and then this one I featured in my Winkler Tomahawk video, the Bowie Tomahawk. And this one was paired with the full size. You already saw it. This one is the, I believe this is maple. So another Randall Bear Bowie. This is just, it's beautiful as it is aggressive. This is the Randall 14 Attack. This was featured in a movie with Peter Coyote called Exposure. That's a great knife movie, but from what I understand, the book is even better. The finger grooves over here, really nice and aggressive, so that you can really get your hands in there. Nice false edge. It handles differently from the Bear Bowie. There's a likeness to the Bear Bowie. This one handles like the 12.9 that I showed earlier, so like a shorter version of it. Almost, it has in fact the same attack profile. This is the attack number 14, so it has that 14 profile to it. But again, this is one great combat tool. Last but not least, the Randall Model 1. I prefer the 1/8, so not the 7-inch version, the 8-inch version. This one, if I'm not mistaken, is a rosewood handle. Look at that. Beautiful false edge. Look at the profile. That's as classic as it's gonna get. Randall 1.8, the classic with the leather handle. What a beautiful pair. Take a look at those. Randall 1.8, as classic and as American as it gets. I think around that same year, I also found some good in the secondary market cold steel Bowie knives, and I got 3 of the cold steel Laredos, which I think, as far as bang for buck Bowie knives at that time, I think they were selling between 120 and 150. Still one of the best, most underrated Bowies ever made. But of course, there was the Natchez Bowie in VG10. I went ahead and visited Colonel Dwight McLemore in Virginia Beach when he was holding one of his workshops, and I brought these. And boy, his eyes really opened up, and he moved with it. He really liked it. He was a big guy. When I said big guy, he was tall. He had a big skeletal frame, and he loved the Smithsonian Randall Bowie. But he saw this, and he said this actually might replace his Smithsonian. He really liked the Natchez Bowie. This is a really big knife, and if you take a look at the handle, see how it flares out. So it kind of favors this small circumference here, and then it swells out to the palm. So this was really well designed, you know, as per Lynn Thompson, so that as it swells out, it really engages the shoulder more, not the arm line, so that it can really be very floaty when you do your back cut flows. It does not have a false edge. It doesn't have a sharpened false edge. That's one of its main drawbacks. But other than that, this is really one intimidating Bowie. And of course, can't say no to the Laredo. You can just see by comparison to what you saw earlier with the Natchez. It just has fast written all over it. And I have 3 of them. I gave a 4th one. I had 4 of them. I gave a 4th one to a good buddy of mine, and I hope he's enjoying it. I think he's still practicing with it, but my gosh, what a tool! What a great this one. If I'm not mistaken, when it was in prototype, I was actually on the phone with Bill when he said, hey, I just got a Laredo from Lynn Thompson, and he wanted my feedback. And at the time, the feedback that he made was this really fast, really good, designed like the Gambler. But just like the Gambler, he said that, well, it doesn't have a guard. And that's one of the drawbacks to it as a fighting Bowie. I mean, that's how the man thought. That, you know, you got to think in terms of fighting, because that's what he thought Bowies were for. I happen to still like it. As you can see, I have 3 of them. Not all of them can be Hell's Bells, but I still think that they're absolutely beautiful, and I think they're great. I can go ahead and do a video of them as well if you would like. These 2 knives are from Greco Knives, and I'm of 2 minds of these. I think that, you know, I think on paper they're really good. The fact that they are, I like the profile of it, but the handles it's a little sharp, meaning that there's some sharp edges on them, but I think the knives are actually really great. And I went through this phase where I was looking at boot knives. I was trying to understand boot knives, what the methodology was behind them. And reason for that, you know, is New York. And I got into one of those altercations, you know, and as I got I'm lucky in New York, and that, knock on wood, you know, I pretty much resolved all of those altercations. But the guy was about to pull a boot knife on me, and that's why I started to understand. I tried to understand boot knives at the time. He didn't get to pull the boot knife on me. He was a little too slow, and I was a little too fast. But I would say, and I say that like that's how it actually went down. And just a little lesson there: if you're going to have a knife on you, really know how to deploy it, especially under pressure. Because this poor guy, I mean, he was just practically tripping over himself trying to get to the boot knife. I didn't get to see the boot knife. I saw like the sheath system attached to his boot, but he was too slow and too clumsy. I guess the adrenaline kind of got to him. And it was from that exchange, I was like, I gotta examine boot knives. What are these for? How do they work? What is the deployment system? So I took a look at Greco knives. I was like, that's kind of interesting. I think Randall has some boot knives as well, but I'm gonna rather spend my hard-earned dollars on if it's gonna be Randall's. I mean, it's got to be on their more classic stuff. But this was very interesting, and this is what started me down the road of not just boot knives, but the idea of the ballistic knife, meaning that it's the throwaway, right? Before you get to your primary. I like the idea of it. And it's something that I've trained a little bit. I've trained it a little bit. I think it has its own functionality and has its own purpose, but it's not a big part of my curriculum. I don't think it's as educative. I don't think it informs our body and our anatomy well, to throw and then go ahead into a primary. I think I'm not quite there yet in terms of seeing its value. I can see its strategic value, but I don't necessarily see how it can make me a better martial artist, right? So it was around that same time that I started to explore the cold steel folders again. I was never really a big fan of them because, yeah, although I never really heard bad things about their locking mechanism, I wasn't too crazy about it. I wanted something that was a little more robust. So these are the cold steel Voyagers. This is around, I'd say, 2010 version. The handles were very plasticky, but as you can see, the reason why I started to do it is because I was starting to explore the Navaja methodologies. And I would say that it was around this time when I was looking at the Voyagers and experiencing, what was good about it, what I liked about it. This is the Vaquero Grande, which is the favorite of Lynn Thompson, the founder of Cold Steel. And it was around this time, and because a lot of it had to do with receiving the Damascus Bagwell from Bill, but also when I started collecting the Randall knives, that I started to kind of try. I had questions around what was going on with knives and the knife industry, but that was around 2010. In what we're seeing now in 2023, 2024, so around that period is really a culmination of something I started to observe in the industry, which got us to where we are now. And it actually, what brought it to my attention were these two knives, because these two knives were very commonplace, and quite frankly, they were so ubiquitous. You could see it in a lot of brands. You could see it more available online. So what started to happen was that there was a need for more higher end, better materials and better manufacturing processes, because back then it was either you went super high end or you went with something relatively affordable. And what started to happen, especially this is just my own observation, I could be way off, it could have been other factors, but this was brought to my attention at the most recent Blade show, where there's an observation that the market is softening, but also something that was brought to my attention by a video by a YouTube influencer, Edged Mindset, and he's been around for a long time, and I loved his video about the state of the knife industry. But for me, what I'm seeing in the knife industry now started here, because what we see here, like these kind of plasticky handles, the lock back, which is good, but not excellent, not like top of the line, but good. It's serviceable. And the same thing here. So what you're looking at is a blade steel and a blade profile that is really quite good, really super razor sharp, but everything about it is serviceable. Everything about it makes it function, but it didn't necessarily take it to the next level. And from my experience, and this is where I became a little more interested in cold steel, was with the introduction of Andrew Demko and the Triad lock. And when he introduced the Triad lock, he introduced the Raja, he introduced the Espada series. That's when I started to become really serious about cold steel, because they took themselves a little more seriously in terms of going beyond serviceable design, beyond serviceable construction. And as a result of it, I think, this is just my observation, that's when I think things started to change for the industry, where you can't just have serviceable anymore. You had to have things that actually took it to another level and then another level, because the knife industry and the knife market was actually growing because of social media. So these two knives here was not just a turning point for me, but it was, I think, a turning point for the industry, in that By 2010, the knife industry had become a little more entrenched and mature in the use of social media, although there was still opportunity for growth. But then, because there was more feedback from customers through social media, it was around that time where things had to change, and we started to see them change. And you'll see my own collection change because of it. So the next part of my collection is actually an extension of that evolution that I was talking about with cold steel. And in my opinion, they went with higher grade materials and better construction, especially with that triad locks. And that triad lock, in those days, Andrew Demko was putting out those tests where he was comparing locks, and he was taking all kinds of video of locks doing well or failing. So social media at that time had started to really do a great service for consumers, not only in raising awareness and interest in the products, but also doing a type of consumer report service so they could do comparative studies. And on top of that, the top of the heap at the time was the triad lock, and specifically this Navaja, modern Navaja of cold steel. This is the Espada XL, and just look at that, how gorgeous it is. But at the same time, it's not too modernized. This follows a lot of the same lines of your traditional Spanish Navajas, civilian steel. This is the cold steel Espada large at about 5.5 inch of blade here. And then you have, of course, the XL, and I don't think the XL can even fit in the entire camera. No, I can barely do it. And this is a 7-inch blade. But look just how marvelous that is compared to what I was showing you before. This was a massive pivot for cold steel. And in my opinion, I think it raised the game for everybody. But in raising the game, it ended up creating a whole new market and a whole new criteria and a whole new standard in terms of what to expect. So now, there was a different market segments that were created and a different market segment play, in that there was more demand for good high-end stuff. For my own personal evolution, I started to have a better understanding of classical concealment folding type weapons, and it helped me understand the more modern versions using the Navaja methodology and the Navaja mindset. Very different from what we see in Filipino martial arts, in that there's a little more of an exchange interplay between lead shoulder dynamics. In the Spanish Navaja, there's more of a willingness to change lead shoulders, whereas in FMA, once you're committed to one shoulder, like you're going to lead with the right, you're just going to lead with the right. So this was a very exciting time for me, because not long after getting the Bagwell Damascus, I got these two. And so I kind of went into very deep study for the next several years, and frankly did not purchase another knife or edged weapon until actually almost 4 or 5 years later. So a few years later, I wanted to see how the offerings matured and how the industry was changing, because around the time of the Voyagers, when I purchased them, the market was still pretty much, in terms of its offerings, relegated to, you had your high-end customs, and then you had your kind of more affordable offerings, and they were a little more like beaters. So you went to the backyard and did stuff with it. But what ended up happening was that you had your high-end customs, and then you had your beaters. And with social media, what did people do? Well, they actually took their beaters and went to the backyard and did things with it. And when they did things with it, that's when you started to have knife influencers, where it was just, oh, look at this, I can do this. And then they would give feedback. You had a lot of influencers saying, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And so our industry started to listen. Our makers, our designers, our manufacturers started to listen and started to see better QC and better offerings. But it really started with the maturing of social of social media. The high-end customs still saw some play in the influencer market, but it was really more of a product review. Let me show you what I like. Let me show you what I don't like. But a lot of them weren't necessarily tested. Some were. I saw some videos where like Chris Reeve knives were tested, but the majority of the videos at that time was really more towards a little more show and tell. This is what I like, and this is amazing. Versus the beater offerings, they were used, they were tested, they were abused, and as a result of it, I think the industry listened and thought, oh wow, I think we should do something with this. And I think as a result, what ended up happening is that you started getting these kinds of offerings. So you saw the Espada XL and L earlier, but now what you see here is the more affordable mass offering of it. So you have this amazing Espada, large Espada 5.5, G10 handles, really grippy. I like that it's really grippy because, again, although it can do the job from a utilitarian purpose just by looking at this design and taking a look at its pedigree, this is a Spanish navaja. This is a combat tool, also used for utilitarian, but if you take a look at it, the multiple gripping systems behind it, this is a combat tool. And I just love, this is when I really started to give cold steel a lot more attention, a lot more of my dollars, really, because they were putting out some really, really amazing stuff. Because you're not ever going to find another company that'll take a look at a traditional design, traditional martial design, stay loyal to it, modernize it, make it with better tools and better design, better locking mechanisms, and then offer it at an affordable price. Those were the amazing heyday, in my opinion, of cold steel, because those were the years where practically everything they put out were not just winners, they were winners prior to the ones that they were giving before. And this is the XL. I mean, that's my hand, that's the handle, and that's the blade. I mean, just from a practice and a martial development perspective, these tools have been really amazing in helping me understand how folding knives combatives work in multiple contexts. But nothing was more educative as far as folders than the XL. Because the XL, I think that it was the first XL I had. I made a mistake with it, and boy, I cut myself really bad on that one, because that was when I really started to pay attention to not every folding knife adheres to how you want it to adhere. It has its own rules. So it was the XL that taught me that. So a little later on, I would say that I started to explore different methodologies as it relates to martial weaponry, but also a very different kind of paradigm and support system for them. And I started to explore two paradigms. The first one is the Southeast Asian paradigm, Silat. And because there's a lot of congruencies between Filipino martial arts and Silat. And so when I started to, I actually took some training with Burton Richardson on Silat. Some of the key takeaways of Silat and some of the mechanics of Silat and how really devastating martial art it is. And sometimes from what I've seen, it has this, it's a very different mindset. It's very fervent. That's what I would say. But one of the main takeaways I took from Silat was how those lower stances, how they take very low stances, a lot of level changes. But when I started to look into it, a lot of those level changes are dictated by the karambit and how the use of the karambit, if you're looking to really optimize it, has a lot to do with being able to level change. And so I started to investigate it. I started to look at folding karambits, but also fixed karambits. So this is the Tiger Claw, the cold steel Tiger Claw, again with Andrew Demko's fantastic triad lock. Really super slim profile, and I really enjoyed. And again, this is a good example of what happened with the dynamics that I mentioned earlier as it relates to customer feedback. One of the pieces of feedback that Cold Steel was receiving was that this ramp over here, which is supposed to catch on your pants and help with a tip-up opening with the karambit, it wasn't necessarily catching on the pants pockets because it would just slip off. And that was a bit of a learning curve for me when I first tried it, because I did observe that. So in terms of feedback, what did Cold Steel do? They made this indentation here so that it was easier for the material of your pockets to catch on. And I think that's where this is a very fine example of how social media and influencers, when they test the product and then they have tens of thousands of followers and they say, hey, I just tested this and this is what I found. So either buyer beware, or product company provider, could you make this adjustment? And then they make the adjustment. I think this was a very fine example of why the market changed, because now it was the market itself, the consumer itself, who was providing the feedback in terms of the design and in terms of what manufacturers were going to have to do. It wasn't the designer anymore who is basically doing this feed forward to the consumer top down. It was more of an interdependent communication. But this one, this Tiger Claw, I think is a supreme example of that new dynamic where the designer was far more cognizant of the feedback of the market. Because if they didn't, then there would be this YouTube video hanging out there saying, hey, there's a flaw here, and it's going to impact their sales. I think it's a good dynamic, but it ended up rearing a very different kind of ugly head. So I got these two. I think these are fantastic. I really like how long that handle is so that I can get a good length on it. But I also really like the Browse folding karambit here. This is a production, and it has a flick opening. But the thing that I really like about it is the fact that it's a little more traditional as it relates to the karambit, in that when you hold it, the point actually indexes with your thumb. So when you punch forward, it has that penetrating capability. Remember when I talked about how the Winkler R&D, the front spike, has a karambit feature, like a forward spike, because the traditional karambit design has it so that it's angled this way. So it acts like a spike, but it has these catching capabilities. I really like this one, this particular grip. And if you take a look at these here, they catch on the pants very easily. It opens very, very quickly. One of my favorite carries. These are really great. And pretty good fist load, I think, also. See how it ends up right here, has these studs, so pretty good fist load as well. I got a couple of them. They were out of production for a while, but I think they are back, very affordable. But I did also look at fixed karambits, and I got a couple of M-Techs, and I like M-Tech for this reason. There is an exercise in karambit training methodologies where you do what's called chopping wood. And what you do is that you find a tree, and then you just do your patterns on the tree, like really rapid. And I think in Southeast Asia, the Silat practitioners, they find bamboo and they just tear it to bits with the karambit, because the idea is that that's what the karambit is designed for, supposed to catch and tear, rip and tear. You can't expect it to behave like a knife. So the practice was go ahead and chop wood with the karambit. I got one that's relatively inexpensive, so I don't have to worry about damaging the tool. This one I think goes for 20 bucks, I believe, the M-Tech. And I really like it a lot because one, the design is really good. It has a really cool look to it, but it handles pretty well with the chopping wood business. And then, of course, I went ahead with the Schrade karambit, which I think is really underappreciated because, you know, in the Silat culture, the karambit, they come in different sizes. And here in the United States, we tend to just pay service to the smaller ones. But in Southeast Asia, they have pretty big ones. And this is a little more towards that kind of karambit, where not only is it's traditional because of the size, but the fact that it's double-edged. This is a double edge. There's been some complaints about this part of the karambit right here. And your palm could land on the edge, kind of, sort of, maybe. But actually right here, it looks like it's sharpened. It isn't. I can run my finger right here and it's totally fine. So it's not actually sharp. This part is sharp, but this one, no. So actually your palm can rest here. But again, if I'm not mistaken, the newer versions, they made this even wider because of feedback, so that now it's made those changes and made those improvements. And yet another fine example how social media allowed platforms for the consumer to voice their concerns, and the industry responded. And I think that that's where we're at now. So at the same time that I was pursuing my karambit studies, I decided to also pursue the Japanese sword. And for many of you who've been watching my channel, you know that my collection of production Japanese swords adorn the back wall. It is the background to my shooting studio. And I went really deep into it. And this was another eye-opening process for me in my professional development as a martial artist, personal and professional, because I came in with a really open mind. I came in studying Musashi, Munenori, Takuan Soho, trying to understand through the literature at first what the mindset of the samurai, but most of all, where the soul of the samurai resides, which is supposedly in his sword, the katana. So I started a sword collection to understand not only its evolution, but it has its own different uses. So this one was my first, and I would say my favorite of my katana. I mean, I love them all. They're like kids to me. But I would say this one is my favorite. This is a buge. This is a buge katana. And at the time, I would say this was about mid 2010. So you're looking at 2015, 2016. This was considered the workhorse of the entire collection. In those days, you couldn't necessarily get a working katana that was serviceable, not necessarily. And buge was supposedly the most top end at the time, in that not only did they adhere as best as they could to traditional design, but they were also considered workhorses, so they were good for tameshigiri practices. And there are many details to this that I really like, but the one thing that I really like, and it shows Buge's commitment, which is Sensei James Williams and the late Keith Larman's company, their commitment to bringing the actual design of the Japanese sword to the West and to adhere to it as strictly as possible, is that if we take a look at the tip, right? This is the tip of the sword. If I turn it so you're kind of looking at it top down, do you see that kind of diamond shape right at the tip of it, right here? I hope you can see it. If you can see that tip, that is very unique to Japanese swords, and it's diamond shaped because this means that the sword was designed, ready for this? That design was for armor penetration. It allowed the samurai's sword to be able to penetrate armor. This makes it very unique in terms of how Buge's standards are, in terms of their adherence to traditional design, because Japanese swords aren't necessarily in the business of piercing armor anymore. They are really more towards practice, EI practice, and also tameshigiri practice. But the fact that they kept this here means that they were really committed to the pre-Edo period kind of designs, meaning battlefield. So this part they kept, and I really like that. Really drew me to buge and started my buge collection. The other part that I really like about this fantastic buge sword, called the Samurai of all things, not kidding, is the fact that the handle itself is not to Edo standards. Edo standards is about 10 to 11 inches. This is a little more than that. I would say this is at about a 15-inch handle. And you're going to have a lot of people say, well, then that's not necessarily authentic. But from my understanding, the pre-Edo swords had longer handles, from what I understand. And correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody out there has a different idea, then please mention in the comments. But from what I understand, the longer handles did two things. One, improved leverage. So when you're two-handing it from here, you could change grip so that when you initially strike, it's here so that the pivot point is shorter so it can move faster. But once it makes contact, you could take the bottom hand, go longer, and really get through to that armor. I could be wrong, but if somebody has a different idea, please mention it in the comments. But that's how I understand it. It gives you the option to change grips. That's one. The other one, and if I remember, this was an article by Sensei James Williams. He said that if you decide to go one-handed with the longer handle samurai sword, what happens is that if you swing hard, it will run up against your forearm and the swing can stop because the handle contacts your forearm. So it runs right into it. I thought that was really, really an amazing detail and the kind of thought that was put into these weapons of war. And I started collecting buge. A lot of it had to do with their adherence and thought that went into the traditional design of Japanese swords. Really spectacular. And I would say very low key. If you take a look here, it's a very low key design. The second buge sword I ended up getting is the Shobu. Now the Shobu Zukuri design is apparently a design, the way I understand it, it was the design that came out when it was what was prevalent, if I'm not mistaken, during the Mongol invasion of Japan. So the Shobu Zukuri was what was prevalent at the time. It has, from what I understand, also a different type of mechanics to it. I know that when I move with it, it doesn't necessarily feel like the samurai. There are some subtleties to it that are really hard to describe. But you can see the Suba is smaller compared to the samurai. But you can also see the length. It still covers my entire forearm. It does handle very differently though. But it's really magnificent and I would say very strong. I would say of my buges, this might be the strongest one that I have. There's like a weight to it and a substance to it that I can really feel. And I think it's wider also. The blade is wider. The next one in the roster is the Buge Dragonfly. Now the Buge Dragonfly, unlike the other two, the Samurai and the Shobuzukuri, they are a little more adherent to pre-Edo designs, whereas this one is a little more towards Tameshigiri practice. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it's designed to be, it's a little thinner and more dedicated to Japanese mat cutting. Because it's a little thinner, it can be a little unforgiving, meaning that since it's more purpose-oriented, specific to mat cutting, it's unforgiving in that if you have a bad cut, it can bend. From what I understand, the dragonfly is an insect in Japan that was revered by the samurai because they had a way of just attacking other insects where they were just really pretty aggressive about it, and they were like a helicopter. They can go in many directions. So the tombo, I believe that is the Japanese word for dragonfly, is what this is named for. So because it is lighter, the construction is lighter, you can change directions with it very quickly. So if you're doing multiple cuts on a tameshigiri mat, this would be the sword for it. It's very specific in its purpose. But as I mentioned, since it is very specific, make note that at the tip of it, it doesn't have that diamond pattern to it that was designed for armor piercing capabilities like what you saw in the pre-Edo inspired samurai and shobu. Well, actually, the shobu doesn't have it either. But if you look at this, you see how much thinner it is? You know, it's not as wide because it's very specific to tameshigiri. Really light. I love handling it, but and also if you, as you can see the handle, I like the longer handles. It goes all the way to my elbow. I haven't done any tameshigiri with it. I just respect Japanese martial arts so much that, you know, I'm very, very respectful of the processes and the culture that it comes from. That even though I own this and I have the opportunity to cut, I think finding a really good sensei, and I'm pretty sure I've found one. I just have to go visit him again. In terms of the tameshigiri cutting, I just have to make sure that I get the good instruction for it, so I can go ahead and use this fantastic Buge Dragonfly Samurai sword. This one is very similar to the Samurai, almost same exact dimensions, but I think it's a little longer. The blade itself is longer. The blades that I just showed is above 28 inches. I think it's 29 inches, but I think this is the longest one. This is 31-inch blade and also a 15-inch handle. I just love them. I love the idea of having to study the pre-Edo style swords. I know there's more of them out there. I will get to them at some point. But as of right now, I'm working with my Buge. So this is the bamboo, a little more ornate on the suba over here. But if you go ahead, take a look at that handle. Same exact. It goes all the way to my elbow. And then, look how marvelous that is. Some oxidation here along the edge. I think that's pretty natural. And then as you can see, that diamond-shaped tip is there. And again, it adheres to the original purpose of the samurai sword where people battled in armor. And that is the bamboo. This is a variant of the bamboo. It's a little shorter, I would say. I think this is a 13 or 14-inch handle and about a 29-inch blade. But this one has a really nice story to it, this Buge bamboo sword, because it was put up on eBay a few years ago. I would say maybe about 5 years ago. And when I asked the seller for the date, I think this is in the early 2000s. And when he showed me the paperwork, this was during the time when Buge was using Manchurian rail steel. And Manchurian rail steel, there was a period in World War II when the Japanese Imperial military were being issued Japanese swords, samurai swords, the gunto, that were using Manchurian rail steel. And there was a video that I saw from a sensei in Japan who said that the Manchurian rail steel were in many ways superior to the tamahagane of Japan that was being produced several hundred years prior. So it has a reputation for strength. What I love about this particular Buge bamboo is that it is it has a pretty cool story. So when I spoke to the seller about it, why he was selling it, because it was so rare, he said that this belonged to his father who had recently passed away. And his father was, in his words, a gun nut. He was a gun collector. And this was the only edged weapon that he had in his shed. But everything else was all types of firearms, all types of semi-autos. But he had placed this in a place of reverence in the shed. And he said that this was his most prized possession because there was something about its character that he really liked. And when I showed him pictures of my Buge collection and I told him that I was training in Shinkageryu, he wrote me this really nice note where he said, "I'm very happy to see that my father's sword is going to live in a home where it was going to be appreciated and well loved." And that really was it really got to me when he said that, because I think that that aspect of the hobby of knife collecting tends to be a little bit on the bad side of consumerism, which is being able to just dispose them on a whim. Whereas in Japan, the swords were something that were handed down from generation to generation. And it wasn't just handed down because you were the next one in line. It was handed down because you had to earn it. You had to be worthy. So we don't have that process here in the United States. If I feel like buying a production sword that was going to function really well, I can. That's why I own one of these. But there's something lost in that process, meaning it's less of a question of deserving and more a question of being worthy. And this is where my own personal practice strives towards. It's not about just I want to be deserving of the sword. I want to be worthy of it, because once I am worthy of it, then the sword will reveal its actual secrets in terms of what it can do for life-giving purposes, and also the setsuninto, the ability to take life. It can do both. It's relatively neutral, but it really comes down to the skill and the willfulness of the warrior. And I like that the seller said that this belongs in a new home that is very appreciative of it. And yes, I strive every day to be worthy of it. Not long after I got those pre-owned, I ended up ordering a couple of bouquets from bouquet.com. And this one is the Shishi, the lion dog model. And this one is one of the more ornate ones. And it's really hard to show with this angle, but they really did one heck of a job with it. They have this piece to it. So it's almost like a shuriken almost. You can take it out. And my thinking is that prior to them drawing the sword, they kind of launched this through it and then went ahead and did it. I could be wrong. I may very well be wrong, but I think that that might have been its purpose. You see it in a lot of antiques as well. It might very well be decorative, but I think at one point it might have served that function. It has these really nice granular details here, but you also see it on the tsuba itself. You can also see it on the tsuba. The handle of this sword is narrowed, so you don't have that axe handle to it, so it's a little more traditional. So it's a little more, I would say almost customized to it, where right here it's relatively flat, so that when I put my hands right on it, it's designed to drive forward and edge a line. Fujikashira details are spectacular. And I think here you can see more of that granular detail that I was talking about right here. Really, really well done. And from what I understand, this design was something that Keith Larman had come up with based off of his studies of the Bizen style of sword making in Japan. And Keith Larman had a lot to do with the design of the Bugei swords. And he passed away around that time. I believe it was around 2019. And not long after I received my Bugei swords, the ones that I ordered from Bugei, they shut down temporarily. And from what I understand, it's because he had gotten sick. And not long after that, he had passed away. So I have this honor of probably owning one of the last Bugei swords that the late, great Mr. Keith Larman had inspected. So this is one of them. All the Bugei swords I own are Keith Larman inspected. This one is the Bugei Pine sword. I really like this one because this is the ones where, you know, on the saya itself, it has some of that art. And you see that in the Japanese antiques where the saya has some sort of art in it, and usually it has some sort, it shows some sort of reference for nature. And in this one, the reference for nature is pine needles. See how it's green, and these are the pine needles right along here that you can see. Really unique tsuba. And this is where I would say the sword handle out of all the buoys that I have, this is the one that feels the most traditional. It feels like it's really narrow. And you can see how it has this kind of alignment so that once I put my hand on it, it really lines up with the mechanoreceptors so that not only, let's say I do a cut with it or a slash with it, my entire body is going to run through it. Of course, it requires the requisite skill. But I think it's really well done, really well executed in terms of the themes. And from what I understand, when the Bouguet first came up with this was supposed to be one of their workhorses. I think it's too beautiful for it to be a workhorse. Great and beautiful design. I think out of all the Bouguet swords, I think this is the one model that is the most coveted. And this is the Bouguet Peace Sword. And there are a lot of interesting details to it. If you note in the Suba, there's a skull here. There's a skull motif here. But then if you also take a look at the Saya, what you start to see is that this is the grass over here, right? And if you notice that the grass is like really super small, but then as you go along the Saya, the grass grows. Just to give you an idea of how the Bouguet people work, Keith Larman said that his concept for this sword came about when he was reading a poem by the famous haiku poet Basho. I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but something along the lines of, after a great battle, and I'm going to completely paraphrase it, but after a great battle, whatever is left behind by the samurai really are just, what's left of them, their skull, but also the grass that grows, meaning what seems really important and really worthy of our focus to the point where we raise conflicts and even lose our lives in time is entirely ephemeral and becomes overgrown by nature itself. So what the peace sword was trying to convey was this universal conflict of trying to do something about whatever it is you're trying to do with your life, which ultimately raises conflict. But in the end, all of that conflict leads to the peace and universality of everything simply just moving on all of its own accord. I love that they were able to incorporate that into the meaning of this specific sword. The other thing that I really like about it is that it is their most innovative design, because not only did they put that initial fuller, which is here, there's a second one. You see this in, if I'm not mistaken, in the later models of katana, designed to make it lighter. So since you have those two, it is very light. This is the lightest katana that I own. I think it's very well executed, and I really enjoy moving with the peace sword. And as you can see, still pretty close to my elbow. Very highly coveted. I was lucky to even find one when I did. This is the Bouguet Peace Sword. And this is my entire Bouguet sword collection. What I have here is one of two of the Hanwei Katana that I own, and I think this is the best Hanwei has to offer. This is the Hanwei Tori Elite, and this is a dedicated cutting practice sword. But look how beautiful it is. Like, if you take a look at the Saya has this nice texturing, and then it has this wonderful lacquered bamboo. How it handles, again, I don't do any tameshigiri as of yet, but I want you to notice something about this. Notice that there is a flaring out of the handle, and then this narrowing of it. You didn't necessarily see that in the Bouguet, but you see it in this one. But you tend to see it in the authentic katana, and it's called wasting, where it narrows here, flares out over here. And I like that they were able to capture that. It's not the easiest thing to do for a mass-produced sword, but I'm glad that they were able to get this. This is why this is, in my opinion, the most well-executed of the Hanwei swords, because they stick pretty close to the details. I think it's magnificently done. And also, what you have here, look at the details of it. Everything is tight. Overall, very well executed. And I take a lot of pride of ownership in this Tori Elite. And again, I have not yet moved into matte cutting, but I know that when I do, I'll probably be cutting with this guy, because that's what he's for. This is the Hanwei Raptor Shinogi Zukuri, and this is the Raptor series with Hanwei, meaning this is a partnership with Sensei James Williams, and the idea behind it is that they wanted a more budget offering, and this is what they came up with. 5160 steel, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a very bare bones. This pretty lucky with, because this is not a partial Samegawa. This is a full wrap Samegawa, meaning it's one piece of stingray skin that goes all the way around. It's not paneled. And if I'm not mistaken, the person that I bought this from, the handle, he had it redone. And if I'm not mistaken, the person who did it was Josiah Boomershine. So I'm pretty lucky in that this is also very well constructed and a little closer to the real thing. I don't know if that's possible with a production sword, but it's a little closer. It's not axe handle oriented. It's also relatively narrow and a little closer to how a real katana handle would work. 5160, relatively uncomplicated. You don't see a hamon. You don't see any of the waves that you would normally see on a Japanese katana, but it's a workhorse. That's what it's designed for. 5160 steel, I don't think you can go wrong with it. And I got really lucky because the handle was rewrapped and recustomized with a full Samegawa, and it's something that I really enjoy. I enjoy moving with this one a lot. One of 3 Ronin Katana swords that I have, Ronin Katana. They have really good budget-friendly katanas, and you know, they're serviceable. They're serviceable swords, and they're very tough. Matthew Jensen, who in my opinion is the premier katana reviewer on YouTube, he did a series on these, and there was one with the O Katana where he took it to destruction, and he did things to that sword that you can't even do with a jackhammer. So I think that this is a really good sword if you're looking to do kind of if you're looking for a sword for the zombie apocalypse. I think this is a very strong candidate for this one, the Ronin O Katana. So the handle itself is relatively short. You know, it's not like some sort of 15-inch handle, but is 5160. I believe this one is also about 30 inches. This is a very long sword. That's why it's an O Katana, which means big katana. And I like having the O Katana because, frankly, I think it moves pretty well one-handed. I like moving with it one-handed, although it's not designed for that necessarily. But I like moving with it one-handed. I really like it a lot, and I think it's very well balanced considering how big this sword is. Another Ronin. This is the Ronin Elite, and it's a class of katana where they use supposedly the Soshu Kite method, where it's they fold it and then it's sandwiched, so it's like a steel sandwich. That's like the best way I can put it. So they have one type of steel and then they fold it over another type, so it builds this kind of sandwiching effect to make it kind of stronger. They use 10 steels, 1045, 1060, and 1090. So it's a kind of method where it's supposed to reinforce its strength, and it's a traditional method. You may be asking at this part, transferring your force from your feet all the way into your hands through your body and ultimately into the sword itself. So the idea is that if you're not aligned in any way, then you're not whole body integrated, and so the integrity, the power of the strike is not as good as it could be. Not saying that hitting somebody with a stick is not as effective. No, if you've ever been hit by a stick, it can be very devastating and even lethal. But for my own progress and for my own self-perfection, the idea of working with tools that force me to integrate my entire body and raise my level of kinesthetic awareness so I'm a little more core-centric and not just arm-centric, that's what the Japanese sword did for me. Because if I'm holding a Japanese sword with two hands, then I have to have a really, really strong awareness of my entire body. Not necessarily so if I'm using just one hand to hold a Bowie knife or hold onto an Itak Tagalog or a Minasbad, because the other side of my body doesn't have to work with me. Second, Ronin Dojo Pro Elite Soshukite construction. And believe it or not, and this is a public service announcement, they have sales, I'd say about in February, where it's like their scratch and dent sale. So it's basically their seconds, and these three Ronins that I showed you are factory seconds. And the thing about their factory second scratch and dent sale is that it's really hard to find a scratch and dent. And from a functional perspective, they work really well. This katana is one of 4 from the Huawei forge, and Huawei for a very long time was considered the affordable, high quality forge that made really fantastic Japanese swords. I'm not sure if they're in operation right now. I don't think they have been for a long time. If they are, they're very hard to communicate with. But when I communicated with them, I had a fabulous experience with them. And this, as you can see, this is black leather. Really good for grip retention. This is the Unokobi Zukuri style. And Unokobi Zukuri means that you have this kind of fuller here. I don't have the right Japanese term for it, but what it does is that it lightens it. And this is the one that it makes that swish noise when you move around with it, makes it really light. So this is the Unokobi Zukuri style. And I love it, really super light. Handle here is a little more traditional, a little more Edo style. So you see it doesn't even make it to halfway down my forearm. So the grip is relatively fixed. It's right here, or maybe even closer. That's about it. Look at that wonderful dark red saya. Really wonderful. This is my second, and this one is Shobuzukuri. So it doesn't have that fuller to make it lighter, so it has a little more weight to it, a little more oomph. And also, same Edo style grip, a little shorter. Now this one is very interesting because I think this was a very interesting attempt at a tachi. And a tachi shows that the sori is the curve of the sword, is a little more pronounced. But the other thing that you're going to notice is that the other swords that I had earlier didn't necessarily have a curved handle. So some of it were wasted, but the majority of them were straight. And the reason for that is because it's very hard to take the handle of a sword, which runs all the way through the handle, and actually curve it. That's like, it raises the cost. But I don't know how they were able to do it here, but they were able to put a slight curve onto this handle. So it's a little closer to the way it was done in Japan. But the one thing I want you to notice with this is that it's a pretty extreme curve. And it's more like the tachi. And from what I understand, the tachi was supposed to be the sword that you used when you were on horseback, and it was curved so that it really accentuated, so that when you cut down, and you're cutting down, and the bad guys are like, your enemies are all behind you, it kind of kept continuing with the cut. So the slash went all the way back. and that's why it was curved. And I ended up getting two of these. This is the one with the blue silk handle here. Really enjoy that. But to try to understand the mechanics of it, and even if there is a methodology for it, and because I think that's part of the blade study, meaning, I try as much as I can to study all types of tools in all types of dimensions, even the samurai sword. I don't just go for the traditional Edo period. I also take a look at what is supposedly a little closer to the Sengoku Jidai period, and some of these types of designs, like you saw. This is made of T10. Both of them are made of T10 because of that extreme curvature. I will say that the Huawei swords are very beautiful, and they're very light and very well constructed. I can't wait to order from them again, but they're so hard to get in touch with. Part of my sword studies means that I, of course, had to get into Filipino swords. This is from Ron Kozakowski's traditionalfilipinoweapons.com. Now, the interesting thing about Filipino swords, Filipino martial culture, and Japanese culture, there's a lot of conversation about the usual conversation around Filipino martial culture and Japanese culture is Japanese martial culture, especially around swords, is, well, which one is superior? I think that what informs the swordsmanship culture of both really has to do with the history and the evolution of the martial culture there. Japanese martial culture had no shields at all. They had armor. So, and a lot of that had to do with the weather and the kind of warfare that had evolved. They had horses, they had archery, and they had armor. And plus, it was colder weather, so it was a different kind of terrain. And so they were not a sword and shield culture. The Philippines, however, very diverse culture, 7,000 islands with just as many dialects and just as many cultures, and it was warmer. And so we did not evolve into a horseback riding, cavalry type of battlefield type of warfare, but we had sword and shield. So the kind of swords that you're going to find in the Philippines are mostly one-handed swords. And this is a Minasbad design. And the Minasbad is, if I'm not mistaken, famously known as the Kalasag breaker. The Kalasag is the Filipino shield. The first time I handled this Minasbad from traditionalfilipinoweapons.com, I wasn't sure of it because it liked to fall forward. But then I learned that a lot of Filipino swords have a tendency to want to fall forward. And I'm not surprised. Why? Because these are great slashers, great choppers. But this was the sword that really forced me to understand what core-centric movements were. Because if I hold it in this position for a long time, even give it like a good 1 or 2 minutes, I'm going to start to feel my arm fatigue. So finding an optimal position allowed me to help align myself with my core. So then now when I'm moving with this Minasbad sword, it helped me come up with a very different way of moving as per Filipino martial arts. So it wasn't like moving with a stick. Moving with a Minasbad, moving with a Filipino sword is not the same as moving with a stick. So in my martial studies and through the study of the Japanese sword and through the studies of the Filipino swords, both of which are still continuing for me, if you want to be a complete martial artist in any way at all, you have to study the sword because it will help open your eyes, especially raise your kinesthetic awareness to what the other possibilities are. And chances are your biomechanics, if all you do is train with the stick, you haven't really tapped into Filipino martial arts, let alone any sword arts, but specifically Filipino martial arts, until you have handled a Filipino sword. These are my other swords from Ron Kozakowski's traditionalfilipinoweapons.com. This is the Itak Tagalog number 2. There are 2 models of them, and I got both in the Itak Tagalog number 2. And this is, from what I understand, more of a northern design. So this is from Luzon. And the reason why I ended up getting this is because I have, as most Filipinos, we had grandfathers who fought in World War II. I had both grandfathers fight in World War II. Both of them were in Marking's guerrillas, but also my dad's instructor, Felicissimo Dizon, was also in Marking's guerrillas, and I think Tatang Illustrissimo was Marking's guerrillas also. And from what I understand, it was this model of sword that they were using during their guerrilla runs against the Japanese. This is lighter than the Minas Bud. And I'll tell you, I've tested these swords. I've tested these swords at our home in Connecticut. We have like woods in the back, and they chop well. They hold up well. The transference of force back into the hand is minimal, so it's, and most of all, it feels really good in the hand. If I practice with any Filipino swords at all, I would say most of my time is spent with this Itak Tagalog. And one thing, it was a story that I read somewhere that the old Filipino manongs in the Philippines, their way of cooling down from a long day's hard work was after they were done eating dinner and before they went to bed, they took their itak and they did some form of carenza with it. And I have upheld that same tradition here at home. So right before bed, just a little bit of carenza, just a little bit of footwork, just a little bit of shoulder opening, T-spine movement. Because to me, that's the real benefit of sword work. Because how many sword fights are we ever really going to get into? The majority of our work with the sword has a lot to do with parasympathetic management. So the ability to soothe out our motor control capabilities so there are no afferent signals coming in that can cause any sort of low-grade chronic pain. And I also power lift. I deadlift. My deadlift. Oh well, let's go back. My total lift is just a little over 1K. And so, you know, it's nothing to write home about. But the fact that I have no knee injuries, no shoulder injuries, no real injuries from lifting, not only comes from really good technique and really good programming, but I really attribute it to work with these amazing swords, because what it does is that it allows my joints to express themselves in true multiplanar movement and also with a true whole body globalized kinesthetic awareness. And this is why my position also with my Estocada practice is that swordsmanship, martial weaponry, is actually a health practice and has a great warring prep as well in case we go into a zombie apocalypse. Take a really nice look at this handle. Really beautifully done. And something that I want to let you all know that I come from a long line of escrimadores, long line that goes back several generations, and these swords are all named after my granduncles who not only fought in the war, not only fought in World War II, for Marking's guerrillas, but they were also esteemed escrimadores in their time. And I named each of my swords after my granduncles. Keeping with Filipino sword design, but a little more modernized, this is the Zombie Tools Sharkalope. Not sure why they called it a Sharkalope. I'm sure they have a reason for it. But this is actually reminiscent of the Itak Tagalog. Really nice, really clean, and really super light. At one point, a reviewer, I think it was Scalagrim, talked about how he liked to flick with it. I don't advise that because I think it's going to jam up your wrist in time as a practice. But take a look at that grip. Take a look at how you can punch with this part of the guard, and you can do the puño, upward puño, downward puño on this. I really like this design, and I can't wait to order another one. Zombie Tools is, in my opinion, I think they're really underrated. I think some people get a little lost on the zombie name, like, you know, but their designs I think were really good. I got to handle them at Blade Show 2024. Their Apo Katana is really good as well as their Felon and their Belmont. I really like those. But this Sharkalope one, really nice, really well designed. That handle can be really heavy though. So make sure that when you're moving with it, be aware that even though it's a little forward tipping, that handle can be really heavy. So just be mindful of it when you practice with it. I really like this one. Sometime last year, I got into Balisong. I'd always been exposed to it to some degree or another, but never really truly pursued it as a true practice until last year. There are many reasons for it. There's a stigma in the Philippines of the Balisong that this is something that you really only handled if you were somehow part of a criminal element. But I think that's a disservice to its design, its history, and how so much of Philippine history is actually uh, in many ways intertwined with the Balisong. And I want to share this part with you because the Philippines was really devastated after World War II in terms of having to put itself back together. So the Balisong actually what became more than ever a personal defense tool. I know that my dad, he came up during that time, and he told me some pretty hairy stories about the use of the Balisong during those days. But it was just absolutely necessary as the Philippines was just trying to recover from the devastation of World War II. But I think that trying to destigmatize the Filipino Balisong and really admiring it not only as a marvel of engineering, but really super innovative in terms of a self-defense tool as a true weapon. I think there's a lot to be said about it, and in many ways, I think it still requires a lot of exploration in terms of the build-out of a curriculum implementation, because the way it's presented right now in the United States, it's really more for flipping. So if we take a look at the moonsault over here, the Kershaw moonsault, I think the Kershaw line, I'm gonna make this clear. I'm not part of the flipping community where they do a lot of acrobatics with flipping. I come from the more traditional Filipino balisong, being a Filipino martial arts practitioner. So I think that the flipping community gave the Kershaw balisong and the Benchmade 85 Balisong a little bit of a hard time because it didn't adhere to their criteria of what a Balisong is supposed to be, which is it's supposed to be relatively light. The edge is supposed to be relatively dull, and so moving away from the martial aspects of it and more into the athletic aspects of it. I think it's good that they do that because it takes away the stigma. But I think it's important that once we remove the stigma, we go back to its original purpose. And I think Kershaw does a great job of that. So the modern Kershaws and the Benchmade 85 goes back to a more upgraded traditional balisong, which is this is a self-defense tool. So I like how it opens, flips open, really has a nice drop point to it. The skeletonized construction is really fantastic. And I think it's very good as a modern upgraded balisong. And these are its cousins over here. I think they're great. I think they open really well, and I flip them a lot. But again, I'm a Filipino martial artist. I don't have a lot of openings for this. Once I deploy it, then I move on into what my practice or my curriculum dictates that day. The Bali Benchmade 85, I think, is really something that was overlooked and does require a second look because I think this is going to become a modern classic in time. Titanium handles, really super light, and it has that kind of spring opening here. So all I have to do is squeeze and off we go. S30V blade. I mean, this is as high quality as it gets. I mean, coming from Benchmade, Les DSCs, who founded the company on the basis that he was going to create some of the best modern balisongs ever. I think this is a very good iteration of it. But what you also see here are the traditional balisong, and I have so much respect and reverence for them because when I see these, I get to see what previous generations were working with. And if you take a look at my other videos on some of the traditional balisong used from a self-defense perspective, I think that the balisong almost requires its own separate curriculum. I don't think it can be just lumped in to traditional Filipino martial arts. I think it's its own separate curriculum and has to be taught separately. But this one, this brass one, this is the one that I practice with the most, meaning this is the one that I allow to open, flip open. It's heavy, so I'm very careful with opening it. But this reminds me of the kind of balisong that I was exposed to when I was younger. It has a heft to it, and it really means business from a self-defense standpoint. This is a very, very serious martial weapon. The other ones also just as serious. However, I'm going to use a Tagalog term here. I kept it so that they are madikit, and madikit means it's sticky, so I don't let it flip. I want to preserve the integrity of the tool so that when I open this, it's a little tighter. You can hear that, but also it requires a two-handed opening. The handle here is made of kamagong, and this handle is what is considered a slim type. This is very traditional and very, very old school. I asked the maker to have it in brass because in the Philippines, brass has a type of spiritual warding type of quality. So I had all of them have brass on it. So it's not for decoration. It has a spiritual meaning to it. So balisong in the Philippines, also, although it has a stigma, for the real practitioners, the ones who really revere it, the way the Japanese samurai revered the katana, the Filipinos revere the balisong. The Filipino martial artists revere the balisong, I think, in a very similar way. It was also around this time that I was starting to dive a little more deeply into the Sayoc methodology. So I was looking at smaller knives, and one of them was a knife that I got at the New York Custom Knife Show from C4 Knives. This is a knife that I got. The maker's name is Frank. I forgot his last name, but he's a really cool guy. But what I really liked about it was the way the ergonomics of it is such so that you see how my index finger can go here, two fingers here, pinky on this side, and has this thumb ramp, but allows space for the index finger to go, so that if I'm going to do any sort of small knife, 3 of 9 kind of work, it's really maneuverable, but also enough so that when I work with it, you see it aligns with the index finger. So that if I just point, I really like this one a lot. I haven't gone back to his booth in a while, but I do intend to pay him a visit. I think next time he's at New York Custom Knife Show, I'm going to come visit him because I really enjoyed this one a lot. But this is the beginning of one of my forays into Sayoc Kali. I'd known about Sayoc Kali over the decades, but this was the knife when I got it. It's like, okay, I'm going to commit to it. So I started to learn a little bit more about it. Part of those studies led me back to cold steel, and by this time Andrew Demko's work has really permeated and taken over the entire folding knife inventory of cold steel. And if I were to say that if I was to have one pocket knife that would just kind of rule them all, and off I go into the zombie wasteland and covered in all types of gear, if I had to have a folding knife, it would be the Cold Steel Andrew Demko 4 Max Scout. And this aligns very much with my Sayoc Kali practice. If you just take a look at the drop point feature of that, if you take a look at the drop point profile, if you have a little bit of understanding, I like to say that I have a little bit of understanding of Sayoc Kali. This profile, I would say, fits the best for it. And I don't want to go into too much detail as to why, because it's the kind of system that is really about lethality. I will say that as a result of that, this is the one from an ergonomic perspective and also a blade profile perspective. This is the one that lends well the most to the Sayoc Kali practice, the way I practice it, right? And also, if you notice, I have 4 of them. And the reason why I have 4 is because I have 2 that I primarily work with. I like to train nowadays 3 of 9 right and left so that it's simultaneous, right? So you do this business. I think it's this. I can't do the whole thing because it's in this vision, but the idea is that I like working with 3 of 9 template right and left using the 4MAX Scout. I really enjoy it. And that's why I have 4 of them. So basically I have a pair and then a backup pair. And they're just so super affordable, so well made. I think, in my opinion, in many ways, they are the ultimate in terms of folding knife from a self-defense standpoint. Not too far behind them are actually the upgraded Demco Cold Steel Voyagers. These also have the triad locking mechanism, but take a look at that profile. It's very different. And take a look at the handle. The handle is more substantial, has a little more grip. I don't think it's G10. I actually think it's the same kind of plasticky handle that it had before, but because of that redesign, look at how much more ergonomic it is. Take a look at how they went ahead and put in these new grooves here, so there's a little bit of differentiation in texture. It has, in my opinion, a classier kind of feel to it, but look at that drop point profile. So not too far behind the 4MAX Scout Demcos from Cold Steel. As far as my Sayoc Kali practice is concerned, this is not far behind at all. And I just love just the entire design of it. The fact that I can also go into multiple grips for it. And if I come in with the left one, yeah, I love moving with these as well, although the 4MAX is really the one for me in many ways. This one, these two, I highly recommend, and they're actually my favorite. The drop point in the Voyager series is my favorite. Now, these are Voyagers that are in the Chris profile. So, not quite a true Chris in that the spine of it is not sharp. The real Chris, both sides are sharp. This one is not. But this one, take a look at that waviness of it. And I like how it has that, the very tip is a beak. So it has a little bit of that ginunting kind of hawkbill action to it. This is really cool also. Same handle as the other Voyager. And yes, I got 2 of them. Really very cool and really very effective as well. I'm sure somebody's going to ask, but all the Cold Steels I own are all pre-GSM. Not saying that the GSM ownership has been bad, but I will say that all the Cold Steels I have are pre-GSM ownership. This one is the holdout, and I believe this is the holdout XL. Yeah, this thing is huge. So it has a kind of Dirk design to it. I like that the holes are gone through, so it's much lighter, but it has a very slim profile. So if anything fits in the pocket really well, it's this one. Jacket pocket, pants pocket, it all but disappears. But when you deploy it, it's like you're carrying around a kitchen knife. But as slim as it is, because of that texturing in the handle and because of that kind of sharpness, the sharp angulation of the handle, it's actually very secure. I can choke up on it. I have that indexing over here, so I can choke up on it. But if I were actually to train with it or use it in a self-defense situation, I'd hold it a little more this way so that I have a little more real estate to deal with and manage that range a little bit better so I can keep them in long range. What you're looking at, I believe, are 4 of the most underrated and underappreciated folders in the knife industry. And what you're looking at is the budget-friendly, affordable $40, I think, for the Cold Steel Luzon folding knife. I think they are really phenomenal. I think all you have to do is take a look at a Google search or YouTube search in terms of their performance, because from a performance standpoint, they're really stellar. But of course, my channel focuses on ergonomics and terms of martial development and training. And from what I understand, this Luzon is modeled after one of Lynn Thompson's favorite Balisongs. And if you take a look at it, if I'm not mistaken, take a look at how that flick opening comes out. See how beautiful that blade is. And it is made of 8C13 MOV stainless steel, really sharp, very durable, but there's a lot of martial features to it that I really like. It has this secondary locking mechanism so that the liner lock holds in place, so I like having that secondary mechanism. But there are design aspects to it. The grip, really super good and secure. It has this indexing here, so it's also nice and secure if I end up holding it this way. But take a look at the funnel grip option, push dagger option, and I have this here so that if I need to kind of pivot one way or another, I have this control also. So from a martial perspective, I really enjoy this knife, and for $40 it really helps me as far as my martial development is concerned, to help me understand what these big folding knives are. But it's also a good functional tool, and I ended up buying 4 of them, and I think that it's something that is worth a second look, only because it is so well constructed, really well done, and it's something that a lot of martial artists and knife enthusiasts can really enjoy. I certainly enjoy mine. This is part of the Cold Steel neck knife series, and I got into the neck knife as part of my exploration into the throwaway knife concept, meaning that if you're trying to you're trying to bridge the gap, there's a reactionary gap. So the idea is that you do a throwaway first. You throw a knife at the person, and then once you throw it, then you can go ahead and deploy your primary. It's an interesting concept, and I think it's very effective. I think it's also a very separate skill set. And I think that, it requires a lot of time too, like real dedicated time. And a big part of it is less about aim, but more about making sure that your rig is set up correctly so that when you throw, it's accessible to you and it's almost like second nature. But a lot of that has to do with setup. So I think that if we're looking at the ballistic curriculum, the ballistic knife concept, ballistic meaning that you can throw it, right? Not like an actual ballistic knife, because that's a separate design. But the idea that you can throw a knife first to fill the reactionary gap, and then from that reactionary gap, you can go ahead and bridge with the primary. I think that's a separate curriculum. It's a separate skill set, and it's something that takes a lot of time, but it's more to do with your setup. So what I have here is the Cold Steel spike in the Bowie setup, and it's actually a good small knife as well. So I think that you can do 3 of 9 with this. I think it's very good for that. I like the mini tack. I think I like this one much better because you can go from this grip to this grip far more easily. You can see, if you can see that transition there. I like this one a lot. And then if you go to ice pick, I think that's really good as well. So it's very versatile. Very, very versatile. The mini tack, and this one I highly recommend. The Secret Edge, this one, which is like fixed and a small version of the holdout, I'm a little tentative with it. If I like it, I like the shape of it, but when you draw it from the neck knife, you don't know which edge is which way, because if you pull it and then all of a sudden you do one of these because you're looking for an assisted, but in fact you do one of these, that's no good because that's where the edge is. So it's really hard to tell. You got to make sure that your setup is correct. And again, the neck knife configuration, looking into neck knives, really has a lot of conceptual lessons and learnings in terms of setup, deployment, reactionary gaps, and less to do with movement motor control learnings. It's more about how did you set yourself up for success? And I think that is its own curriculum, and I think it's still a good skill set to cover. When Andrew Demko first came out to Cold Steel, and with his designs and locking mechanism guns a-blazing, he really led more with the Raja and with the Spartan. So it was the Raja. What you're looking at here are the Raja 2 and the Spartan. And the Spartan, and they're really designed more with that kind of, this one is like a folding kopis, K-O-P-I-S. And so it has this hooking mechanism over here to really secure your grip. But this is a chopper. This is a chopping mechanism behind it because of that belly swell. And I haven't really worked with it too much, but if I've worked with anything that is closer to a chopper, more than my own World War II kukri, I've actually worked with the Raja too. This has taught me more about kukri methodology than the actual kukri itself. It shows me the multiple directions it can go just by the use of my wrist. And then when I move on to the kukri, then I can see, oh, okay, so I need to shift my weight. I need to shift my feet. But if anything helped me understand first how a kukri functions, it was actually the Raja too. I really enjoy working with this one. And it has very similar chopping capabilities compared to a kukri. So it's for a folding knife to have the chopping power of a kukri, that's really something else. I think this is also very underrated, the Raja too. I actually remember the first time Lynn Thompson did his video of the Cold Steel Frenzy. It was a very different kind of video because normally they're in the way they shoot their videos, especially in the last few years where they were in some basement. It was dark, the lighting was heavy, and there's some pig carcass hanging out there. By the time he got to the Frenzy video, it was a little different, a little more ASMR. It was like in some, I think it was at his home, there was a fireplace, and the footage looked really good. And the way he explained it, it was like a much calmer delivery, and I really enjoyed it. But what really stood out to me was how the three different frenzies were set out. And the only real main difference between the three is the kind of steel that was used. At one point, they were using I think it was a carpenter steel, CTX, something like that. And then they eventually moved on to S30V or S35V. And I think they are fantastic. I think these are really great tools. This is the S30V version that we are looking at here. It's a really great steel. And look at how thin that profile is. This is one of my favorites. I did a video of it in conjunction with the Hirazukuri and the Tanto. I'm going to do a separate one on these as well because I think they need a little more love. Because they're actually very versatile. They were designed after the Japanese kabutowari, which is a close quarter tool on the battlefield. And yeah, I think this one is the CTS XHP steel. So I got lucky finding this one because they're hard to find. And I think this one is probably CTS XHP. Nope, this one is S30V. This one is S30V. But they're really, I would say that the Cold Steel Frenzy, you're not going to find another knife like this out there. Only Cold Steel makes these. And I got lucky that I got the one with the tool steel. Well, not tool steel. I'm lucky that I got the one with the carpenter steel. But S30V, fantastic. These are really fantastic. I'm going to make videos with these ones. Few things I want to say about these fantastic 1917 Cold Steel Bowies is that there's a lot of things about it that's well executed, and there's a couple of things about it where I go, well, it could have been better. But I still really like them a lot. One, if you take a look at this sheath, I mean, it's just fantastic, you know, and in many ways it has that kind of traditional feel to it. That's number one. The S-guard, really good that they were able to put that in there. And now if you just take a look at the entire size of it, look at that. Just one intimidating piece of steel to it. Really great. S-guard. It's really heavy. I'll tell you that much. It's really heavy. So I think this one, although it can back cut, I think that it's really good for slashing and cutting. I think it's really good for that. And I've mentioned this before, but even though this false edge here looks really good, it is not sharpened at all. So I really like the design of it. Ended up getting two of them, and as you know, I like to work with double buoys, and these are great. And for its price, really phenomenal. I love the 1917s. I think I'm going to do a dedicated video on these as well. Sometimes you get gifts from really well-intended friends and family who think that getting you a knife is what's going to make your holidays. And I got this. It really made my holidays. This is, I'm a big fan of Elvis, so they figured knife, Elvis, folding, let's do it. And I think it's really cool. I'm pretty sure that this was one of those knives that they got at a street fair. And this person who's very dear to me got this for me. And it's a really wonderful and really thoughtful gift. And it's really beautiful. It's not like self-defense or anything like that, but when somebody puts that kind of thought into what a person will like, I think it's still worthy of putting into your collection. Although it doesn't necessarily live up to a person's criteria, the fact that the person put that thought in there is really cool. And there's Elvis, the king. What you're looking at here are the Cold Steel Magnum 12s. I started to explore the Tanto maybe about a good, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I think that Tanto Jutsu is, it's not something that is necessarily openly taught. I don't know if it's even that popular, but I think that there's a lot to be said about the Tanto. I think it's overlooked. I think that the methodology behind it, even the knife design itself, is severely underappreciated and overlooked. And let me just show you, first of all, the Tanto itself. It's a 12-inch blade. This thing is, it is huge. It's like having a small samurai sword in your hand. But if you try to impose a style with it, it's not going to work. The Tanto is very specific. And that's why you have Tanto Jutsu. It's a very educative tool, but it's very subtle. It's not just going to tell you this is how we're going to move and this is how we're going to do it. You got to really listen to how a Tanto wants you to move. I'm lucky that I have some Japanese swordsmanship in my training, but the Tanto still remains elusive in its own way. I have some of the key principles in place, but I think that as far as a practice, still a lifetime to go. But really just take a look at this. The Tanto is not an ordinary knife. I think that there's a lot of secrets that are held in the Tanto, and in many ways I think that some of them may be obvious. I may be overthinking it, but some of them, from the little that I've seen of how Tanto Jutsu works, that is one really highly effective martial art that is specific to the Tanto. I have 4 of them. I enjoy them that much. I love working with them that much. So at this point, the clarity around my practice is starting to come together. You saw a lot of the katanas, you saw the karambits, you saw a lot of the cold steel. So the Estocada practice, the permission that was given to me by my father, who's my instructor, Armando Basulto, who's my instructor, they gave me permission to name my practice Rolando Estocada, meaning that it is part of my process of understanding weaponry. And it borrows from so many traditions that I've been trained in, but it's important to have a keen eye to the paradigm and the methodologies attached to those paradigms specific to the tool. So just because I like a Bowie knife doesn't mean I'm going to use everything like I would a Bowie knife. And just because I like Japanese swords doesn't mean every time I pick up something, I'm going to move with it like it's a Japanese sword. It's important to approach every tool with a kind of respect so that you understand the culture, you understand its origins, you understand the design purpose to it, so that I allow the weaponry to give me that kind of education. I then went ahead and went back, now that's when my mind was starting to clarify what Estocada was going to be to me. I went back to Busse because they had some pretty cool designs in place. And one of them was this Silent Knight. And the Silent Knight design with this recurve, I thought was interesting because, one, I saw a Bowie knife of this configuration with the recurve in Norm Flaterman's book, and I thought, whoa, a Bowie knife with a very aggressive recurve? That's crazy. But then I think there is a Southeast Asian design to it, and I believe this is called either the Hanap or Janap, J-A-N-A-P. You can actually find it on Ron Kazakowski's traditionalfilipinoweapons.com, where you can kind of see this intersection between East and West. The Norm Flaterman Bowie knife had one that looked like this, but then you see one in the Hanap. So I went ahead and kind of thought, well, let me take a look at a modernized version. And I found this Silent Knight from Busse. This is an SR101. I have a couple in their famous Infi, and I think they're great as well. But the SR01 is very good. It's very close. So I don't go too crazy on my Infi. I go for the design. And this is really one heck of a design. They have their own inside story as to why this is there to begin with. I don't necessarily bother with that. I have my own ideas as to what this could be for. But take a look at that puño design, that kind of breaching design here, that sharp recurve. You see those fullers there to lighten it. As intimidating and as big as they look, I would say this is maybe about a 10-inch, 11-inch blade. They're very light. They're almost as light as my Damascus Bagwell. They're very light, and they don't have that kind of feel where when you normally have that kind of forward recurve where it wants to fall forward. It's relatively neutral. So that lightness, that not lightness, really comes into play. I unfortunately don't get to play with them that much, only because I'm very deep into other practices right now. But the times I've trained with this have been really pleasurable. I highly recommend these, and this is from Busse. The sheaths, also as beautiful as they are from Rowe's sheaths. So Rowe, R-O-W-E, pretty well known, I would say. Ken Rowe, an absolute gentleman. What I have here also are the AK-47s. So the Busse AK-47s. And notice that I had them paired up. They're matched up. So they're a little on the Espada Idaga side. So this is like this forward recurve Bowie Hanap style. But then this is more of a wakizashi. And it's not a traditional wakizashi because if I'm not mistaken, that is a convex edge. And it's a great chopper. Like if you chop it on something, like you hit a branch with it, the branch kind of splits. So it doesn't necessarily slash through very cleanly. It kind of splits it. So, the branch just kind of falls off. Whereas if you use something that has, a little different edge geometry, it'll slash through and you can actually see it slash through. It makes that kind of line. But I like moving with these, and the balance of it is also relatively neutral, so it's important. This one is also, interestingly, a very educative tool because you can't just move around slashing with it, treating it like a stick. It doesn't behave like a stick. I think this was really well designed because of that. And I have two of them, as you can see, and they match. When I first got into Tomahawks, I actually got into the very affordable Cold Steel Tomahawk series, the modern ones specifically, with the Warhawk and the Trench Hawk. So the Trench Hawk, you can tell because it has that very, very aggressive triangular spike in the back. It's very sharp. But then if you take a look at that was the Trench Hawk. If you take a look at the Warhawk, it's more of a spike it's not completely sharpened. So let's take a look at the Warhawk first. They both have similar profiles. They have these long handles to it. I like that it has this kind of ergonomic grip to it. See how sharp that handle is. And now let's take a look at that spike. That spike, good for breaching, not sharp. It's not going to penetrate in the way the back spike of the Trench Hawk will. I think this is a little friendlier if you're the kind of person who swings your tomahawk and it goes all the way back. Be careful because these spikes are they're very pointy. They hurt. If you do it the wrong way, they will hurt. But they're really effective. If you go to YouTube, you see the kind of tests that have been done on Trench Hawks and Warhawks. You can put them through a lot of bushcraft work, fine work, heavy work, and even throwing. And there's even a video out there where they show some wood cutting with it, but from a combative perspective. I have my own video on it as well where I can show its capabilities. And I work with the Warhawk and the Trench Hawk. And let's take a look at the Trench Hawk now. Take a look at that sharpened, holy smokes, it's like double-edged. So this one doesn't necessarily behave like a tomahawk because it's so ridiculously sharp. So buyer beware. This one not so much. There's no edge here. But this point here, holy smokes, very, very dangerous for practice. But, God forbid anyone decides, let's launch the zombie apocalypse. Well, guess what I'm going to be using? Here we go. Trench Hawk and Warhawk. I really enjoy working with them, but be really careful with how you work with them. This is the Cold Steel Recon Hawk. So Andrew Demko designed this one. I bought it because it was my idea of trying to get a little more familiar with the Sayoc style of Tomahawk, and this was before I got the Winkler R&Ds. But I gotta tell you, having moved with them, I think it's still good. I think it's still good, but I got a couple of problems with it. I mean, one of them is that there's no way to choke up on the handle right here, so it's like just straight. So it really just gives you one, maybe two handle options at most. But that spike, man, that's really dangerous. It's There's just so many things that could happen with it. I still practice with it very carefully. I'm still trying to understand it and appreciate it in a way where it's like, oh, well, if I was in a bad situation and this was the only option I had, how would I move with this without without doing any damage to myself? So I gotta tell you this. I think they have to rethink this one because this back spike really, really dangerous. Other than that, this is a really tough tomahawk. This is the Recon Hawk. Very tough. So right now, the direction of my collection is such so that I'm trying to work a little bit more with this kind of kit in mind where, there's a sword and there's a tomahawk and then there's a knife. And it's just for practice, right? The working within a context and a scenario where it's like, hey, if you were out in open battlefield and edge weapons are what you have, well, what would you have? Well, right now in my mind, it would be a sword, a tomahawk, and then a knife. And this would be the fixed knife I would go with. This is the CRKT Hissatsu 6 because I think the profile itself, it does what a knife is really supposed to do. I think knives are very good slashers, very good cutters, but really what it's supposed to do is penetrate. I think that the sword and even the tomahawk, very good for slashing, smashing, cutting, chopping. I think those two do a great job of that. But by the time you get to close quarters, you're looking at penetration. And this is how Sensei James Williams designed it at Williams Blade Design with that in mind. And I think the handle, the grip retention of it, not only is there good grip retention, but there's good grip variations in it so that it is really, to me, the ultimate fixed knife if I were putting together my own kit. And I got two of them and I plan to get more, but my hope is to get them directly from Williams Blade Design because they have them in several iterations, like some smaller, some bigger. But I would say that there's so much simplicity, elegance, and complexity. Simplicity and complexity all at the same time. But I think that is a very good sign of what a good edged weapon is. I think the samurai sword, the katana, is very much like that as well. It looks so simple, so elegant, but there's a very complex paradigm that supports it. I can't say enough good things about this magnificent Bagwell Bowie that I got at Blade Show 2024 as a gift from my younger brother. This was such an amazing gift, such an amazing find because in Bagwell's inventory, he tended more towards gambler designs and Hell's Bells design, but a crown stag, I've never seen a Bagwell crown stag. And I think I've really found perhaps the most rare Bagwell there is because you've seen the two videos that I put together dedicated to this, and I'm probably going to do more. But the fact that this can, in fact, do edge down back cut work and then seamlessly flow into this edge up paradigm here, I would say this is what makes it absolutely unique because it just flows from one to the other, and it has a lot to do with how he shaped that crown stag. I've never seen anything like it, and I can't say enough good things about this Bagwell. I'm just so glad I found it, and I am the proud owner of it. Really phenomenal. Look how beautiful. Look how beautiful. We're going to be ending this video with two of the best in class. And what you're looking at here is the Winkler R&D. I've done several videos on them, so some pretty good hub content, I would say. So this is the compact Winkler R&D, and this is the full-size Winkler R&D. And this is my collection as of 2024. Still growing, still evolving, but I hope that you can see that the direction of it was really martial driven. There was a purpose to it. And I didn't necessarily just get what was the cool new thing, what was the cool new steel. It was always with some idea in mind of martial purpose, not only from a self-preservation standpoint, but also from a self-perfection standpoint. How much of my own kinesthetic awareness can be developed through their understanding. I can't say enough good things about the Winkler R&D. I think that they are very sophisticated tools. I will also say that they're not easy tools to work with. They're not intuitive. And I think that's a good thing, especially if you are looking to improve and develop as a martial artist, which has been the purpose of my collection for almost a quarter of a century. I really want to thank you all for sticking with me for this entire collection. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And I will be making more videos. As you know, Rolando Estocada is your source of all things martial from a health and lifestyle optimization standpoint. Stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.